right, welcome to episode 6 of the Dr. Stephen Greer Show. I'm Michael Mazzola. I'm a filmmaker who frequently collaborates with Dr. Greer. Dr. Greer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael, for doing this with us. I appreciate your help.
Thank you. The title of this episode is Catastrophic Disclosure. What does it mean? What I always thought it meant was disclosure that results in the complete loss of faith in our institutions because it's uncontrolled disclosure. It's disclosure that is full and unrelenting, and all the crimes are put out on the table. And it's why they're trying to give us controlled disclosure to avoid catastrophic disclosure. So what is catastrophic disclosure, and for whom is it catastrophic?
Well, the term was first used by some special forces guys who were moving forward the last 2 years to come forward with a great deal of that kind of information, evidence, crash retrieval of BT craft, all of it. And they were told by some people in the intelligence community, well, that would be catastrophic disclosure to do that. And I actually think that's a type of gaslighting of whistleblowers. And so what I'm calling catastrophic disclosure is what we're on the verge of if we're not careful. And let me go back a few months when I was talking to some folks after the current president was elected. And one of the discussions was that if this comes forward in a way that has been planned for decades, that it would be catastrophic, that it would be much worse than COVID, much worse than 9/11. And that's what I'm calling catastrophic disclosure. It's not the release of the evidence and information that almost all Americans sense at this point is out there. I mean, more people believe that we've been visited and the government's been hiding things for decades than have voted for any president in modern times. I mean, it's up in the 60% plus range. So, I mean, even the Reagan landslide didn't have those sort of numbers, and very few members of Congress have those sort of numbers. So what it really is, and this is, I think what happens when you have people who are embedded in government who try to keep putting speed bumps in the way of this information coming out, and with it, the technologies, is that they keep trying to say, oh, it's just too much and the people can't handle it. That's not true. The people would love it. Here's who can't handle it: is the permanent bureaucracy of corrupt interest, both in the military-industrial complex, but more importantly, the financial complex. The technologies, even the energy, zero-point quantum vacuum technologies, can't come out because you've got hundreds of trillions of dollars in invested interest in commodities and oil. It should have come out 100 years ago. That's why we did our film, The Lost Century, to illustrate this. What is really catastrophic is this not coming out, or, which is what's afoot, and we'll talk about this, is that it comes out exactly the way they've been planning for 70 years, since the 1950s, where it comes out as an existential threat to humanity, that there are these forces out there. They're calling them NHI now, which is, of course, the pop culture intelligence term that got concocted for reasons we've already discussed. It's basically a cover-up term. But that it comes out and they present it as a threat to national security and a threat to the human species. And that is exactly what catastrophic disclosure is. Catastrophic disclosure is not acknowledging that we're not alone in the universe and that they've been here and that we have downed their craft and reverse engineered them, or even that we have ones of our own that we have built. That would be what most people are already beginning to say, even in Congress. The catastrophic part of it is, and this is what's going on, whistleblowers, members of Congress, people in the administration being gaslit by very slick counterintelligence operators who present it as a threat, and on top of it say repeatedly, and this is what Luis Elizondo recently repeated, I believe, on Sean Ryan's show, the show I've been on in the past, where he basically said, look, we don't have anything like this, right? We don't have any craft flying around that could explain this.
It's either Russian, Chinese, or ours. And it's not ours. We've already said it's not ours. We don't have that capability. And we damn sure hope it's not Russian or Chinese, because then we're really screwed.
Totally a lie. Now, why would that lie be so valuable? I mean, think about this, everybody, for a minute. Why would something that has already been proven, if you go to the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, dpiarchive.com, you'll see, 120 plus crash retrievals, but you'll also see witnesses, military and corporate witnesses to these man-made UFOs. And so much so that people like the recent whistleblower, Jake Barber, has said repeatedly to us, they are indistinguishable from the actual NHI craft or ET craft. The technology is that advanced. In what Lockheed, Skunk Works, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and a few other big contractors have that build these things. We also know they're being built apparently in Russia and most likely China by the same consortium, by the way. This is a global consortium criminal enterprise. So I think that the catastrophic disclosure is that hiding that keeps the technologies that would benefit the Earth away, because they say, well, we don't know how they operate. We don't know what zero-point energy is. Nothing like that's ever been built. Total fabricated, bold-faced lies. That leaves us dependent as a civilization on an 1800s energy paradigm for our energy system, which not only it requires most of the population of the world to be impoverished to some degree, but also under control of a centralized system. So it's actually a type of, I call it petro-slavery, where the whole planet is dependent on the fossil fuel and the centralized power grid to have their very existence, to even live as we live as a modern society. That would all change if these technologies came out. It would be the ultimate liberation of all people in all strata of societies, both in the United States and the developed countries and the so-called first world, but in the developing world even more so. But all of us would be liberated. So who is that catastrophic for? Not the 99.99% of the population that are not attached to the conventional energy generating system. Okay, on planet Earth, 8 billion people. Go look at how many people are directly attached to that industry. Now, it's a very profitable one. It has hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets and commodities that are traded in financial markets. Chicago Board of Trade and others, commodity, that's hundreds of trillions of dollars a year right there in trading, generating commissions. So there's a whole financial issue here. But in terms of looking at the long-term fortunes of humanity, withholding this information and saying that we don't have these technologies is itself a type of continuation of human global enslavement to the current system. Now, let's then add in one other thing. They have portfolios that I know for a fact they go in and show people in national security circles. Let's say that you're the president or your Senate Intelligence Committee, and there are folks who will come in with a portfolio showing very gruesome alleged NHI craft or NHI beings doing things to humans, abductions, mutilations, blowing up villages, vivisections, cutting people open alive, feeding babies to spider-like aliens, right out of a horror movie. Now, aside from the fact a lot of it's made up out of whole cloth, the parts that are real, and there are real victims of abductions. I was almost abducted in 1994. Those are being done by humans masquerading as aliens. But they're also using these technologies to do it. They're using craft that look like an alien ship. They're using technologies that are very advanced electronics, like supercharged Havana syndrome type energy weapons that affect awareness and consciousness and all sorts of things. So those are being used by people who are masquerading as aliens and then convincing officials that there's this threat. But that falls apart if there's a honest disclosure. And that is that there are three things going on. There's the extraterrestrial vehicles and people. There's the man-made craft and man-made alien phenomenon. And then there's the extra-dimensional or interdimensional beings that they deliberately mix up with both the extraterrestrial and the man-made. Some of the extra-dimensional entities are actually able to be brought into this dimension through very advanced electromagnetic systems. And I know physicists and engineers who have done this. It sounds like something out of Stranger Things because it is like that. That's where they got the idea from the movie, the whole Montauk experiments and all that on Long Island, back on the eastern part of the far eastern edge of Long Island. So when you begin to analyze this, the denial that we have these technologies opens up only one conclusion for all this other phenomenon. It's all got to be non-human. It's all got to be done by the aliens. So by denying that we have these technologies, we have these craft, it sets everyone up for coming to one logical conclusion. People have been abducted. There have been mutilations of cattle. All of that, therefore, goes through that open door, even though it's a completely false narrative. And that's why repeatedly these counterintelligence officials go around and say, we don't have anything like this. There's no way. Because as soon as they acknowledge we do, it's not hard to then make the connection from the whistleblowers we have to say, oh, well, these have been used in these counterintelligence operations, psychological warfare, psyops. And that's then, of course, inescapable that people realize, well, gee, what part of this is actually non-human intelligence or extraterrestrial, and what part of it has been masquerading? No one's asking that question. And most people in Congress and the bureaucracy or White House national security don't know enough about the issue yet to come to that kind of assessment, which is why it's so important that we keep putting this information in front of them. But every time that happens, you have people rush in and say, oh, we couldn't possibly have something like that. And by the way, those people are not an emergency doctor like me. Those are people who have great credentials from the military industrial complex or the intelligence community. And so they're going to say, no, I mean, this, we know what this is. I was read into it. We don't have anything like this. So that is a very dangerous game being played. And that is how we have catastrophic disclosure. This information comes out, but it's all portrayed as this one thing, non-human, as a catch-all, and that the staged and faked alien terrifying events all fall under that one category falsely. That then leads to an inescapable policy decision by the Congress and the White House, and that is we have to, and other leaders around the world, we have to unite the world to fight the aliens. We have to have this sort of dystopian of a future where it's us against them, this sort of crazy narrative of endless war that expands to not just humans fighting each other, whether it be Russia and Ukraine or whatever it is, but that we then unite everyone against some external alien threat. And this is exactly what Wernher von Braun talked about on his deathbed, and others have warned me about, and that they have the ability to stage it. So catastrophic disclosure is actually attaching very high value targets, let's call them HVTs, in terms of whistleblowers. And they come out, they provide the information, and eventually, I think in the next year or so, all the proof that we're not alone and we have these craft that are non-human. But then they are attached to people who give this false narrative, who repeatedly go up on Capitol Hill and gaslight the House Oversight Committee members or Senate Intelligence and say, yeah, but none of those are ours. Or maybe there's some from China, right? So, which is a ruse used by many people I've talked to. Well, I can't talk about what we have, but we know some other country has it, right? So if they talk about another country, it's fair game. If they talk about the United States, they're violating what they consider their non-disclosure agreement or the agreement they made to basically gaslight the public and deceive officials and deceive the media, etc. So I think that is how we end up in a catastrophe. Catastrophic disclosure is not the information and the evidence coming out. That's what everyone, I think, is quite ready for. But a lot of these whistleblowers get convinced, slow this down. Why? So that this consolidation around a false narrative, a false flag operation can happen. That is catastrophic, because now that leads to what? It leads to the world having not unity in peace or unity in something beautiful, a new vision of us and other civilizations in the universe doing things together, or a new world being created technologically that's sustainable and peaceful. It's uniting the world under a militaristic sort of global totalitarian system where everyone is terrified of the what's out there in space, and that's how they give up their freedoms. You know, as Benjamin Franklin said, those who would give up their liberty for security shall have neither. And that is one of the real problems with this. The people who would like to control the populace through fear, which is the way that demagogues have done this for millennia, whether it be religious leaders or political leaders, military leaders, the dictators, this would be the ultimate fear play, you know, a big old fear play. And that's how you colonize people's minds, and that's how you end up in a catastrophic disclosure. So my concern is not there would be too much information and evidence disclosed. It's that there's not enough of it in the right context, and that the delay that we see happening, and this has been going on for the 35 years I've been doing this. Let's not forget, the Clinton administration was very close to disclosing all of this. They did form a team, an operation called Team Red, to penetrate those programs and get them under control. And that Team Red was completely decimated, either killed or absorbed into the illegal black projects. And I think this is something we have to be very careful of here, because we're at a point where I believe everything is poised to come out. There's growing bipartisan support in Congress for this, as you saw yesterday in the press conference with Congresswoman Luna, who I have personally briefed on this issue, and others who were there, like Mr. Burchett, but people like Mr. Moskowitz, who is on that task force originally, who I've discussed this with. I think there is strong bipartisan support to get to the bottom of this. The problem is they're being advised very badly by people who swoop in and create these false narratives of threat and false narratives of we don't have anything like this. Now, there are people who've evolved on this quite a bit. For example, there was the David Fravor, who was the F-18 Hornet pilot, who chased the UFO and got the footage and all of that. You all know what that is, and we can show it. But when I first spoke to him a few years ago, he was adamant that what he had pursued absolutely had to be alien, that there's no way any human on Earth had any technology like that. And this would be a very rational assumption for someone having their first encounter with a propulsion and energy system like what Lockheed Skunk Works has, or Northrop Grumman has, or Raytheon has, because they do not move in an aerodynamic form. There's no rockets, there's no jets, the infrared sensors that would pick up a heat signature, nothing. So what is making this thing move like that, right? And so it's a normal assumption for a conventional military or civilian pilot, or a rocket scientist, for example, dealing with normal propulsion, to say, well, that has to be from outer space or another non-human civilization. And that is where you make your big mistake. Now, David Fravor has looked into this and has had, I said years ago to him, that was from the Lockheed Skunk Works. He has since admitted that someone from Lockheed has confirmed to him directly that that was one of theirs. So that is very good evolution, but it takes a while. The problem is, I don't know if we have time for people to spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years wrapping their minds around this, because I think we're on a fast track where all this is going to come out. And if our president and our national security team and our Congress, as well as leaders around the world, really think that all of this phenomenon has to be alien or non-human, then that opens the door for exactly what that 70-year evil agenda has been. And that is to have a threat that the whole of humanity faces. So this is where catastrophic disclosure to me is. Catastrophic disclosure is a false disclosure. It's done in bits and pieces, but in a manipulated way, in a very carefully orchestrated way that ends up, in my opinion, driving policy in the 180-degree opposite direction it needs to go in. But without enough information and without enough disclosure of the facts, this is where you could come to that conclusion, just like David Fravor. It was an error, but it was a rational conclusion he, as a jet pilot for the military, made. It was a totally rational conclusion. Now, on the bright end of this, and the good side of it, is that, and I want to say this, it's a completely nonpartisan person, and it's a completely independent person, because I deal with people all over the world. This issue absolutely has to transcend the sort of ridiculousness of partisan politics. But there was a woman who was recently, I think today or last night, confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who I think will be very friendly to this. And someone that I've known for a while, who's a friend of hers, is Amaryllis Kennedy, who is RFK Jr.'s son's wife. So RFK Jr. is the father-in-law for Amaryllis Kennedy. And Amaryllis Kennedy was a CIA undercover officer for, I don't know, 6 or 8 years. She very much is aware of this subject. She's very supportive of real disclosure. She's aware of the fact that JFK and most likely Bobby Kennedy Sr. were killed over this issue, and that there's a lot of work to be done. So, and you can put up on the screen, the president has announced a White House, from the White House, an intelligence advisory group or board that Amaryllis Kennedy is on, as is Congressman Noon and others, Nunes. So what I see happening is that it's going to be sort of well, I won't say who said this to me, but someone very senior in the administration said this is going to be a knife fight, because over, does this come out? How does it come out? How much of it comes out? Now, on the bright end of it, I'm also hearing from people at a very senior level in the intelligence community that they're speaking of it the way we've always spoken of it, that it has to come out, but that not all the technologies come out all at once. Because I have said, if you look into our archive, what was said to President Clinton and his team 30 years ago in 94, 5, 6, was exactly what I'm saying now, is that the things that are flying around that are man-made UFOs, electrogravitic propulsion systems, electromagnetic field propulsion, those really can't come out because they're going to be figured out to be a missile delivery system. And the Earth right now is an armed camp of a bunch of tribes, call them nation states or religious entities or whatever it is, but a group of tribes that are, blowing each other up over whatever reason they can find. This is the human crisis, actually, because that consciousness still exists of violence and division, but we have more and more sophisticated weaponry, up to and including thermonuclear weapons. But now you add that into the mix. So that has to be not brought out yet. But the energy generation systems that would give us free energy for our homes, our cars, our factories, our businesses, that would grow the global economy. And one of the arguments to be made to the powerhouse military intelligence, mainstream people here in the United States, as well as Congress and the president, is that would be a tide that would lift all ship, but it could be led by the United States. what I'm hearing is that if we don't do it, there are some big countries prepared to do it ahead of us. So even from, yes, so that is imminent. I've heard that from very senior people in the intelligence community. That's all I'll say. And so do we really want to be left behind? I mean, this would be an argument for the current president and Congress. You know, you talk about being left in the dust. You know, the most important technological advances in human history since the dawn of known human history come out, and we're there still fiddling while Rome burns, right? And some other countries come out and say, see ya, wouldn't want to be ya, you know, and this is not what you want to do. So I always tell these people who brag about their America First agenda, I said, well, I got news for you. You're about to be left in the dust real fast on this, because it's a big world, and it's naive to think that other big powers around the world, whether it be China, Russia, whatever, have not studied this issue, they've had their own crash retrieval efforts. They've figured out how these technologies work. And the global organization that's been keeping this secret is fracturing, right? And so I'm just telling you this for a fact. So the question then becomes, is the entity known as the United States of America, right? That constitutional entity, going to be relevant, or will it just simply be made irrelevant? And so that's why I think that the time is of the essence here, but we got to get it right. And what I said to several senior people in the administration and in Congress recently is that if we get this wrong, if you think the mess of COVID and the global shutdown or other problems we've had, 9/11, for example, and what happened as a consequence of that, 20 years of war that was a disaster, trillions of dollars lost, God knows how many people killed, American and people in other countries. And all it did was destabilize the world, destabilize everything further. This would be way worse. That is catastrophic disclosure, my friends, not having the information come out in a timely manner, which would have been at least 50 or 60 years ago. I mean, I remind people that arch conservatives, like Senator Barry Goldwater, who I sat in his living room, and he said, he's this gruff guy, interesting person. I spent a whole afternoon with him. And he said, it was a goddamn mistake then and a goddamn mistake now. This was ever kept secret, and got into a rage, lather over it. And I went, yes, sir, it is. And now that was in like 90, you have to look it up in the archive, 94, 5, 6, somewhere 30 years ago. He's since passed away. But here we are. It's still secret. He felt in the 60s. He had heard about it, but wasn't read into it. It shouldn't have been kept secret. I've heard this from very old timers when I first started this program. People who are around in the 40s and 50s were telling me what a huge mistake that was. And so why are they delaying it now? It's to buy them more time for their nasty little evil, let's have our Armageddon agenda, these weird twitches. And let me put this on the table. These are sociopaths and psychopaths, full stop. I mean, these are people who just, they're control freaks who want the world to increasingly be in permanent state of war and conflict and destruction. And that's what you're going to end up with if we have catastrophic disclosure, which I'm defining as this disclosure being manipulated in a way that leads to this unification of the world around fear and war, rather than universal peace and free energy and an really advanced civilization. So I don't think that the stakes could be higher right now, but and there are some bright spots and there are some worrisome issues here, because we know that, for example, members of the House Oversight Committee meetings I've had with them over the last few years, people will come in with military credentials and say, oh no, don't listen to that. Here's what's really happening. And the next thing you know, they're reaching the assessment that there's a threat and that the aliens are some scary thing. So ironically, all the people I've debriefed, hundreds and hundreds of people in the military and corporate world, contractors, who have actually dealt with the ETs directly, None of them tell a story of a reptilian or a spider-like creature from direct hand. None of them tell a story of being harmed or invaded. None of them tell that story. And then there are people who have been peripherally involved, who have observed these scary things and didn't know. They weren't read into the fact. It's like David Fravor not being read into an electromagnetic propulsion system from Lockheed that he thought was alien. They haven't been read into the man-made program life forms that look alien but aren't, or the ones that are kind of robotic and you kick them over and their skin splits open. It's fake skin. And you see integrated circuits and fiber optics in there, right? So if you're just casually seeing this and you're not read into it, well, you're going to conclude immediately that those were a bunch of real aliens. So that kind of stagecraft, as crazy as it sounds, is real. And it's something that, unless people who are policymakers here and around the world know that, and I'll say how serious this is. About a year and a half ago, I had a gathering with, I think there was this top 7 special forces guys in the United States. And they're being put together to be part of a pulling them out of the military to be part of a platform, an operation. It's a highly classified special access project that's top secret, special compartmented information, SAP, that would be in charge of getting these illegally run programs and operations under proper control and supervision. And when they asked me, what is the most important evidence and technology to seize? I said, by far, the man-made craft, the systems that are simulating fake extraterrestrial events, the man-made aliens, and all the technologies that allow for that deception to take place. That is priority number 1 that I've given them. Way more than, and the second one, a very close second, maybe equal to it, would be liberating the captured ETs that are in underground facilities that are actual non-human that we've captured and are essentially kept as prisoners. Although I think they're called euphemistically refugees. I don't think so. They're not refugees. Yeah, that is actually the term used. That one of the operators, a contractor, said, "Well, they're refugees." I said, "Yeah, well, I don't think you're a refugee if you've had your craft shot down and you've been captured and thrown into an underground facility." Right.
Dr. Greer, you mentioned that the legacy group is deeply fractured right now, and I think that most people will imagine this group as this sort of like specter-like organization, like in James Bond, where they're all sitting around the table and there's one leader and there's one vision, and they all go out and execute that vision with all of its tentacles, all these tentacles acting in concert with each other. But what I've learned from you is that there's actually many competing agendas within this legacy group, and there's people who are driven by different religious ideologies. And so could you unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. And I learned of this in the 90s. In fact, after we had done the first National Press Club disclosure event in 2001, I had someone from that organization say, this has really moved this forward, and there's about 70% of, there's 200 or 300 people on that international committee, policy committee, that about 70% of people think this ought to come out now. Now, the problem is the other 30%, and the other 30% are ultra hardliners. They're also the more violent, psychopathic members, and they're very likely to kill their own people, right? This is why when the former CIA director Bill Colby was helping us, he had been involved in those operations way back when he was the CIA director for Ford and Nixon and Ford, and he was going to get to us one of these very sophisticated zero-point or quantum vacuum energy systems, and around $50 million in some seed money to get it out to the public, because he knew we were going to open source it, put it out so the whole world would have free energy. And he thought it was time to do it. And the week he was going to meet with a member of my board, they found him floating down south of DC in the river. And his best friend, a full bird colonel, told me that absolutely that was a wet work. That was an assassin targeted killing or assassination. So the extreme folks in that organization, here and abroad, are not shy about killing their own people. So there's a certain level of threat and intimidation that goes on. And so the sort of simplistic conspiracy theories that people have are all wrong. I mean, because that's not how it operates. And sort of the strangest end of it would be the folks who are the far fanatical religious end of it. Let me just put it that way. And I have no beef with people being spiritual or being part of an organized religion, but I'm talking about the extremists that want to have Armageddon happen. And like Prince Hans Otto von Liechtenstein told me, we have to have a war with the aliens, or at least pretend to have one, so that Christ will return, and Armageddon has to happen before Christ returns. So that is, as bizarre as that sounds, this is a serious group within that organization. And they are true believers. It's almost like you're like the extreme version of Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or a terrorist group, but it's that extreme religiosity as opposed to spirituality. And certainly most people in religious, I mean, I've been at the Vatican, talked to very reasonable people about this. And yet there are folks in that organization that are drawn from different religious organizations that have those beliefs, that we have the only way forward for humanity is to destroy it so that we are saved in the rapture or something like that. And when I first heard that in 1994, I actually couldn't believe it, although I was very polite and didn't express my astonishment to the prince. But I was appalled that an educated person would actually believe that, number one, and number two, be setting up active plans for that. So you have that extreme faction. Then you have the super hardliners around the energy and technology. Because as one recent whistleblower told me, who we are in the process of onboarding, he said what this is really about is the global energy sector and how that's controlled. Because that's what runs the entire planet, the entire post-industrial planet. And that the people who are at the top of that food chain in the financial system, they in no way want this to come out where the technology is acknowledged as having been figured out, because it means that over 15, 20 years, all of that is going to go the way of the horse and buggy, right? Which it should have. About the time the horse and buggy was replaced by a car, we should have had Tesla's electric car that didn't run on a battery that needed to be plugged in, but a battery that was pulling a generator, pulling energy out of the field of energy around it. Although I don't believe that was 0 point, just as a point of fact, I believe he was rectifying energy from the magnetic sphere, the magnetic energy constantly flowing from the sun and around the earth. And I understand that it's a separate, you can get, quote, free energy that way. But it's different from the true 0 point trans-dimensional energy, which is but nevertheless, it would have been, even today would be a massive breakthrough. By the way, when you and I went out in the desert, and that's what that system was. Remember, in the Lost Century? Go see the Lost Century, folks. We can drop a link to it here. And we went out, and there was this eccentric, brilliant, he was a medical doctor and a physicist working with this thing, and he had this generator sitting in a shack out in his backyard, making
in a chicken coop.
In a chicken coop, running his Bitcoin mining operation and some other things, running his house when he wanted to, 5,000 watts. 5 kilowatts. We saw it. And no input energy. And that was not 0 point. That was pulling energy from the magnetic field and the constant flow of electromagnetic energy that is all around the Earth and flowing huge amounts from the sun every nanosecond. And you can rectify that, meaning you can take those energy forms, rectify them into a flow of electrons. So it's electromagnetic, right? And that's what he was doing. That's what Tesla did for that car, by the way. Now, that's very different from the Floyd Sweet system that was running a car. He had a genuine quantum vacuum 0 point system. But there are many ways to have energy freedom and energy independence for the United States and the whole world. This is the other point, is that there are a multiplicity of technologies that need to be supported and brought out that would be completely safe to do. They don't create ionizing radiation, nuclear, or pollution, and they're not really easily adapted at all to something that's going to fly off at 300,000 miles per hour and end up being some weirdo dictator's missile delivery system. So, but this is something that the people who are the hardliners in the petrodollar energy financial system, they're as fanatical about that not being disclosed as the religious fanatics want to be sure that this issue comes out and we have an existential threat that we have to fight so that we have some Armageddon fantasy that these guys want to see their prophecies fulfilled through. And I think that's all of these sort of the extremist end of this group kind of dominates, because look at any society. I mean, I lived in the Middle East for 3 years, and almost everyone I met, Arab, Muslim, Arab Christian, Jewish, they just wanted to live together peacefully. But you only needed about 10% of people willing to hurl bombs and blow themselves up and keep that fire burning forever. So what people don't realize is that when the good people don't do anything, and what I'm encouraging people who are involved in these legacy programs, who are moderate and fundamentally good people, many of them stuck there because were brought in at a certain age. Now they're getting middle age or older, and even past middle age. And they really want to be liberated from that. Is that I said, now you need to come forward, which brings me to something else. Tonight, there will be handed to the current president of the United States what I have drafted, 5 executive orders, specifically outlining the actions that need to be taken urgently. I know that there are 4 executive orders that I had seen drafts of coming out of during the transition period. I've clarified those and added one that was not under discussion at that time. And the one that I added, I mean, of course, these are obvious ones: whistleblower protection, both legal and physical, a full investigation, an amnesty period where there would be a period, I'm recommending no more than 6 months, where people who are involved in those programs can come forward. And if they completely come clean and disclose everything, holding back nothing, then they have they're immunized from prosecution for everything that may have happened in the past, because that gives a pathway out for these folks, and et cetera. Now, the one that I think is the most important one has to do with what I said a few moments ago, and that is a law enforcement operation, both CONUS and OCONUS, continental United States, meaning in the United States, and OCONUS is outside continental United States, that would go to all these black sites that we've identified, and corporate and quasi-governmental sites that are doing the most heinous crimes, abductions, targeting ET craft and downing them. That needs to be stood down immediately. The trafficking of people to be used in human experiments, which is real, that is going on, et cetera, and so on, that gets fixed and that they get stood down. And another executive order was that there was an immediate order that all offensive weapons be stood down and stopped that are targeting non-human craft, because that is a reckless and dangerous activity not authorized by the president or the Congress. This has been going on just on its own without authorization, and that is something that I very bluntly says imperils all life on Earth. That taking those actions against these civilizations, with as advanced as they are, thank God, over the past 70 years, 80 years since the 40s, when we started doing this with early electromagnetic directional energy weapons and scalar weapons, that they were not violent or hostile, because they would have cleaned our clock. And I tell people, folks like Grush and others who have said, yeah, we've downed these objects and then we've reverse engineered them. Well, here's a news flash. Yeah, we've reverse engineered them, taken the ET technologies and flipped it on them. Now imagine that being done to any nation state on planet Earth. Well, we would go and clean their clock, right? And we would bomb them into the Stone Age. So, I tell people who have all these fantasies about the hostile aliens, I said, dude, what is that comedian? I can't fix stupid. And then combine that with, we've reverse engineered them and now we're using it against the ETs. Now, under what society or group on planet Earth of humans, Homo sapiens, would allow that and not hit back? Well, they haven't, because they are fundamentally very evolved socially, spiritually, and every other technologically.
Dr. Greer, I have found that when I'm advocating for this position, and especially for the position that the abductions are done by humans and they're masquerading as extraterrestrials, this is such a landmine, and I invariably come up against somebody who has been the victim of this, and they're extremely traumatized, and they say, how dare you try to tell me that my experience isn't what I experienced? And so I'm sure lots of people listening to this have stepped on that same landmine. So do you have any advice for how we can advocate for this position when there are seemingly people who are acting in good faith, who are sincerely saying, this happened to me, I'm traumatized, and how dare you question my experience?
Yeah, I think we have to say, yes, you were victimized. And I've said this for years, although it gets drowned out by me making these other points. To say that there aren't aliens violently raping and abducting people is not to say there haven't been people who've been victimized. I know for a fact they have been. And as I said, I had one of the most terrifying experiences of my entire life was having an attempted abduction experience in July of 1994. But I knew enough even then to know that was not extraterrestrial. But boy, was it convincing, and was it terrifying, and was it evil. And so the problem is that we have to say, yes, you have been a victim of these things, and there is a criminal organization doing it that is human, but we have to get clarity on that. And this is why I say to the people, the most important evidence that any whistleblower could come out with, hard evidence, not just testimony, physical evidence, would be those operations. The operations that involve humans using advanced technologies to simulate alien mutilations of animals and people, alien abductions, all of that. And unfortunately, that is something that until there is some kind of a well-trained and well-advised team to go in and stand down those systems, it probably ain't going to happen. And the other problem with that is the technologies that organization has is so much more advanced than what a conventional law enforcement or military group has, that it's a bit like, native people throwing spears into the rotors of a Sikorsky helicopter or gunship or something. It's daunting, and this is one of the big problems. Now, it can be dealt with, and I'm advising some of these guys who are willing to risk their lives to do it. But we need an executive order that clearly authorizes that operation and funds it properly, because I don't think it could be done for less than $500 million to $1 billion, and that's just getting started. Because we're not just talking continental United States facilities, we're talking, the South Pole and Antarctica and South America and the outback of Australia and all over the place, where there are these underground and covert operations going on. And, we keep talking about this. Jacques Vallée has a CIA document from 1985. Now, remember, that's 40 years ago now, where they were talking about how they were staging alien abductions in Brazil and Argentina for their psychological warfare value. So this is not a spurious argument. It's the heart of the problem. And that is, catastrophic disclosure consists of no one discerning the difference between the staged human operations that are designed to portray a threat from outer space versus actual extraterrestrial civilizations. And I think this, as I go around to various meetings, and I'm down here in Palm Beach because I'm going to be taking some meetings with some national security figures tomorrow and probably the next day. This is not on their radar as even possible, right? For many of them, they can't even believe that there are non-human craft. To get them to understand that we have ones operating that are at parity, almost equal to function as a non-human one, and then that there are these even more advanced biological and other weapon systems that involve consciousness and biology and neurophysiology, doing strange things out there. That's to go from no information on this to this whole picture is a bridge that most folks can't get all the way across. But see, we're out of time for that. One of the things is that there is no difference in what I was saying in 95 and now on all of this, but with each administration, with each prime minister in other countries, with each Congress that turns over, you're starting over. Each time you're starting over. And there are always new people entering the arena who have to get read into this fully. And it's a big, heavy lift because it strains credulity. Much of what I'm saying, people go, oh my God, this can't be. He's got to be making this up. I wish I were. I actually wish what I was saying was not true, but it is true. And the only way we're going to resolve the problem peacefully, and this is one more thing that's added, the fifth executive order recommendation, is that there be a executive order mandating Department of State, because I know the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has studied this extensively. His right-hand people were the folks 3 years ago who asked me to go to the SCIF, the Senate Secure Compartment Information Facility, to hand them off a lot of evidence and information, and that we start a diplomatic rapprochement between humans and non-human extraterrestrial civilizations, that we basically take the model of, that's why I'm wearing this shirt, CE5 contact, and make contact with these civilizations within a paradigm of peace, and of that we are all sentient beings, and that we're all denizens, we're all residents of this cosmos and universe, rather than a strictly militaristic, let's shoot them down to get their toys, their technology toys. So that's something that no one has ever done globally. And it also says it needs to be done as a global project. It can't just be the United States. This is why I've been working to get the same information over to Russia, to people in Europe and any other countries we have access to, because I think that at the point when this call comes out, one of the big questions is going to be, now what? We're not alone. They're out there. We're here. This was the fundamental question I asked in 1990. This whole project started because I asked one very simple question. I know we're not alone. There are civilizations out there clearly involved with humans and the earth. I think probably going back thousands of years, perhaps millions. And we're here and they're there. And what are we doing to have any kind of relationship? So the whole concept of CE5 contact, and there's an app you guys can get called CE5 contact, you can go do it, is that it's a simple question that is answered by us stepping forward and saying, we will be citizen diplomats. We'll be ambassadors from humanity to these civilizations with no ulterior motive to get rich with technology or steal their toys and make another weapon system, but purely to have a relationship that's peaceful between humans and these non-human extraterrestrial people of all stripes, from whatever corner of the cosmos they're from. That is a model that needs to, I think, now get officially mandated, where the governments of not just the United States and Europe, but the governments around the world decide we need to reach out to these civilizations with a whole new understanding that's peaceful, and let's give peace a chance. Let's give that a try. We've had 80 years of shooting them down or just covering it up and denying it. And I think that is the fundamental concept behind CE5 contact, that it is the final recommendation on this executive order list. There are 5 of them. Now, you could have a lot more, but I was asked to put everything on one piece of paper, so I did. So, which is what you have to do at the executive level. But that I think would be the biggest breakthrough, because I think if at the same time an operation stands down these offensive weapon systems, we have a sincere effort headed by people of conscience, good people around the world, here and abroad, to create an initiative to officially make contact. I think we'll be very surprised how eager those civilizations are, because no one's done that. The closest it's ever been was when we were doing CE5 contact with the Ministry of Defense in France back in 2010, 2011, somewhere like that. And you'll see in the archive, the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, dpiarchive.com, you'll see the French document that was written to me from the Ministry of Defense, an admiral, who talked about going on a long-term journey with us to make peaceful contact with these civilizations. It's a beautiful, when I read it, I went, wow, this is beautiful. And it was written by one of the senior-most people under President Sarkozy back then. So that was, we did that, and we actually went over to France and did it. And we had all this ET activity all around us. But so that was sort of a little test thing, right? But imagine the full weight and capabilities of the United States and other countries coming together to do that, where at the same time, these fearsome weapon systems that are in space, on ships, on the ocean, on aircraft, and on land are silenced, and we make peaceful contact. Now, the risk is, when that happens, this cabal have enough assets to then say, oh, okay, now is the perfect time to strike the earth in a hoaxed alien attack. See, this is why being very careful about defanging that monster is important, because if it isn't, the hardliners are going to start hitting buttons, and I know what buttons they have, and I know how quickly it can happen. So this is a big risk, because they can say, oh, we're going to make peaceful contact, boom, they blow it all up. And it's not the ETs blowing it up, but it sure looks like it. So this is where the art of deception at such a high level within that part of the intelligence community is dangerous. And I've had these conversations with Amaryllis Kennedy and other people, that this is the biggest intelligence crisis and military and national security crisis, that until that is brought to heel and brought under control, there very, very little progress can be made globally on the human condition, whether it be on the frontiers of peace, of contact with these civilizations. We're bringing out these technologies. This organization Uh, there's some people who called it the Majority Joint Intelligence Committee, MAGIC. It's on one of the top secret documents I have from the National Reconnaissance Office. It's MAGI, M-A-J-I. It stands for the Majority Joint Intelligence Committee. So you'll see MAGI or MAGIC, M-A-J-I-C, not a G. And those are, those operations are all kind of in flux right now, because there are a lot of people from those old so-called legacy operations that do want to come out now, and there's a couple of them putting their toe in the water. But we need to open that up. This is where you give them immunity and amnesty and protection, and you stand up at the same time an operation that gets these programs under control. And one of the reasons I've been going on a lot of military podcasts, I'm going to be back on the Chad Robin Show podcast in March. And he's a Marine Special Projects guy, is to message to people who are in those programs, because they listen to those military podcasts, and say, if there's a legitimate group from the U.S. constitutional government comes to your facility, stand down. Do not fire. Let this be bloodless. Let this be peaceful. And I know that there are a lot of guys who are in those systems who know now that they're trapped in an illegal operation and they want out. There no more than one has said, thank you for what you're doing for those of us stuck on the other side, right? Stuck in that black illegal world. And there are very senior people who are very high officials in and out of the intelligence community and Pentagon, as well as corporate, who want to have a pathway out. So I would say, let's build the pathway out. Let's do it peacefully. Let's make a big transformation happen. But let's not have the catastrophic disclosure that Elizondo and others want, where they deny that we have these things and that all the phenomenon people have heard about are being done by aliens that are a threat to the world. That is the catastrophic disclosure, my friends. That is what needs to be avoided at all costs, because the stakes can't be higher.